Jeff, we've been talking a lot about the abysmal slate of summer movies
Yes.
and how dispiriting it is, and how, we've talked on a couple of recent live streams. What are we going to cover this summer? Because everything that's coming out is a sequel, or it's lame, or doesn't even look like it's worth commenting on. Then along comes Netflix. Netflix put a movie out in theaters very briefly in a very limited run, from what I
Yep.
understand, and
Yep.
then put it onto their streaming service as of last weekend. A little film called Hitman by
Yep.
this up and coming director named Richard Linklater.
Who's that guy?
Yes, you might know him from such films as Boyhood, Waking Life, A Scanner Darkly, the Before trilogy. Everybody Wants Some, Dazed and Confused, and now he's got this. I don't quite know how to categorize it. It is I think the category on Netflix is a romantic crime drama, and it's starring Glen Powell as a college professor who moonlights as a kind of a techie for the local police department
Mhm.
until he gets recruited to pose as a hitman one day when the main officer falls through because he gets canceled because of some abuse charges. And it starts an entire new chapter in his life and evolution of his character. And there's some romance involved and some some real dark tragedy. I was recommended this movie by you. You were practically busting down my virtual door saying, you have to watch this. We have to talk about it. And Jeff, I'm glad you did,
Oh,
because
good.
I got to say, for 90% of this movie, I kept turning to my wife and saying, I love this movie. This is amazing. At one point, I stood up to go, we paused it to let the dog go for a walk or go out and do its business. And on the passing the TV, I applauded. I applauded the television set.
No, I love that.
Yeah. Now, the ending. I'd say the last maybe 25 minutes of the movie starts to get into some territory that made me uncomfortable,
Mhm.
and I think it works if you are not expecting anything in the way of a traditional rom-com or kind of pseudo cop movie.
Right.
Uh, you told me this thing was dark, and boy howdy, is it dark. We're gonna get into Hitman tonight. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Ian. Great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's always a pleasure, and it's always great to be able to talk about movies that defy expectations.
Mhm.
And I didn't know what to expect because Richard Linklater is kind of like one of those filmmakers, like the Coen brothers, works in so many different genres, and no two films are the same, really. So, 20 minutes into this thing, I was like, "Oh yeah, that's right. This is the guy who made Waking Life, one of my all-time favorite
Mhm.
movies." It's
Mhm.
like an hour and a half animated walkabout talking about the nature of existence and
Right.
philosophy and all this other stuff. And
Right.
you kind of get this in this movie. It's not a shoot 'em up. It's not a dumb bubble-headed rom-com. It's a movie about actual ideas, actual grown-ups having complicated relationships, and planting a seed that I don't know if it's true or just the conceit of the movie, that there's no such thing as hitmen. There's only people who think they can hire hitmen and they get immediately entrapped by the police.
Yes. It was one of the earliest, cleverest lines, like, kind of taking a little swipe at uh, even our expectations as we found it on our Netflix queue. I mean, I thought my first thought was Hitman. Really? That's what your movie's titled is? Something that's so generic. And there's been other Hitmans. I mean, I think when you go to the IMDb page, there's like four of them right off the bat. But they kind of defy expectations, just like that statement kind of uh, sort of puts it in a different context. So it was maybe almost a foreshadowing of how this film wasn't really going to do all the typical zigging when it was much more interested in zagging.
And also, just talking about the title, as you mentioned, it's two words, hit man. I always
Right.
ran those two together as hitman. So
Yeah.
when I first saw that, I was like, oh, is it about a record producer who produces a lot of hits? Like he's the hit man. But no, this is
And I'm
something
not sure
completely
why they
different.
did that, because my spell check when I was writing my review kept wanting to put it together as one word, one word. And it's like, well, it's two words in the title. I don't know. Maybe that's how they separated themselves from all those other Hitman movies. But yeah, I'm not quite sure why they did that. But maybe because he's a hit at doing what he's doing, if you will. I don't know. That seems a little far reaching as well. But yeah, it's a little bit unusual the way they've sort of separated those two words, which usually are together.
I don't want to get all artsy fartsy and artistic and stuff, but given that it's Linklater and given what we see in this movie and the kinds of things that are discussed, I would even go so far as to say Hitman represents our main character, the divide in his personality.
Yes.
Potentially that space in between, like the
Hmm.
hitman and the professor. Glen Powell plays Gary Johnson, not the former libertarian presidential candidate, just to get that out of the way.
That guy. I haven't thought about him in years.
Neither is anyone else, but the memes keep coming every once in a while. They pop up again.
It's funny.
But so he is a mild-mannered teacher. It's very much like a Walter White situation from Breaking
Yes,
Bad,
very
uh,
much.
where he teaches by day. His life is kind of a mess, even though he doesn't completely realize it. He's kind of fine just swimming in this sea of mediocrity. He's got
Mhm.
pets in his own place, and he's got an ex who's kind of moved on, but they're best friends. He's
Mhm.
just kind of a wimp, but he's a good-natured, mild-mannered guy. But when he's called upon to step in and pretend to be a hitman for this sting operation,
Mhm.
um, I'm just going to pause and say I have never really thought much about Glen Powell. I think in your great review at the establishing
Oh,
shot, you
thank you.
described him as kind of a beefcake in
Mm.
movie like Top Gun and Hidden Figures and other things. But I mean, Warner Brothers just made an extra $15 from me because I'm going to go see Twisters this summer.
Yeah.
Movie that I had no interest or intent on watching, but now that Glen Powell's in it, he might be phoning it in, but I got to watch him. Because in this movie, when he shows up in this restaurant posing as the fake hitman to meet with the mark, there's a transformation in his character that reminded me of that meme that's going around where you see Christopher Reeve go from being Clark Kent to Superman, and
Right,
it's
just
not
takes
just
the
taking
glasses
off.
off and goes,
he- well, it's not just
his whole
that.
body language, his whole kind of persona changes. It's like, shit, there he is.
It's the body language, exactly. He
Mhm.
corrects his figure. He doesn't have the Clark Kent slouch, but it looks like
Right.
he grows 2 feet. It looks like a
Doesn't
special
it?
effect, but it's
Yeah,
all in the acting.
you're so
And that's
right.
what you get here. It's jarring in the sense of like, wow, where did this come from? But you also get the sense that, as we come to find out, this is sort of Gary's id coming out and
Mhm.
being able to play and really get into character and be someone that he in a million years could never be in real life.
Mhm.
But for the purposes of this job, he gets the job done and he gets a taste for it. And then he becomes sort of this almost a Bugs Bunny master of disguise. We get some
Yes.
montages of him posing as different people to get the confidence of other people who want to have their loved ones or hated ones whacked. And it's very funny.
Yeah, in fact, it's he discovers his inner talent as well as I think his true self in a way. And there's many times in the film when it returns to him teaching where he's asking about, can people really change? Can they become the person they want to be and uh, adapt? And it's an interesting question. And then he sort of frames it in a moral way more and more, including the last exercise with his students outside, where they're contemplating what they would do with somebody who's bad for the tribe or bad for the group of people. And one is sort of the modern jury, and the other one is like cavemen who have to figure out what to do with this person who's being bad in their midst and sort of screwing up the sort of the form of existence in the primitive world. But it's funny too because he not only likes it, but he almost is too good at it in a way. Like he really takes to it. And there's a great portion of the film when he starts. The big twist of it, I guess, the sort of half hour in, as they always say, you have to sort of shift or at least the story sort of establish itself. He's called on to take out the sting operation on a woman who wants to kill her husband. And then when he finds out that she's been beaten and her husband's a real shit and she's also incredibly attractive, he really gets into it and sort of betrays the police by advising her not to hire him, but to go home, pack her bag, and immediately leave because he doesn't want to put her away because he sympathizes with her. But also suddenly he is so Rod, his hitman persona, that Gary all but disappears. I mean, it's kind of funny how more and more Rod takes over, just like Walter White, to your point about Breaking Bad, starts to disappear while Heisenberg becomes more and more of the guy, to the fact where he's changing his clothing, he's changing his way of walking and talking, and saying "goddamn right I am," and he's barking at these people about his prowess and his drug kingpin status. And that's where I thought the film started to get a little dark, because it's like he's liking it too much. There's a Jekyll and Hyde quality to it. I mean, there always is whenever you have sort of a split thing, and that's what I tried to even do with the caricature that I accompanied my review
Which
with.
is a great piece. I'm going to link
Oh,
it
that's very
down
kind of
below,
you.
so you got to check out the review. But also, it is one of the coolest pieces you've done. The
Well,
drawing.
thank you so much. But that's what sort of started to do what you, I think, felt during it. Like, this is so good. This is really clever, and it's never going quite where you think it's going to. Even when oh, he's exposed or people are finding out, it doesn't have the typical kind of oh, I can't be with you Tootsie kind of thing. Like it takes him 2 months to get back to Jessica Lange. It's sort of surprising, but along that time, there was great characterization, and I was shocked at how good the romance is. I mean, I really felt invested in these people because you spend quite a bit of time with them on a date, them talking and just sort of getting to know each other, stuff that usually these films gloss over. And that's where it reminded me a lot of the Before trilogy, where you had these two people who were fascinating individually, but together they were magic, and you just really were invested in these people. And I think they warranted all three of those films in that trilogy. In fact, when everybody says, "Oh, what's the greatest trilogy?" and all that kind of stuff, I always say the Before films, because they were all, I thought, incredible. In fact, if they want to do a fourth one, I'd be there opening day, if not for the critic screening.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that's we're talking about the summer of sequels and prequels and all that stuff. I think more studios and filmmakers need to play the long game of
Yes.
going the Rocky Balboa, the Rambo, not the last one, but the one before it. I'll say even the Clerks 2 route, which I consider to be one of the great sequels, because
Mhm.
you take these characters, where would they be in 10, 20,
Mhm.
30 years, and you catch up with them and
Yep.
you see how they as people have evolved, rather than, oh, we just got another wacky setup for an idea. Let's go see what they can do. But yeah, this I would definitely be there for for, I don't know, what is it, before burial? I don't know what
I,
that would be.
I wonder what it'd be like after retirement.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about. I referenced the Before trilogy in terms of Linklater's filmography, but talking to you just now when you brought it up, I'm like, yeah, this is totally, the same. It's definitely steamier and kind of sexier,
Right.
more sexualized than what Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke had going on. We have Glen Powell and I hope I get her name right. Is it Adria Arjona or Ariona?
Adria
Um,
Arjona. The J is the Spanish pronunciation. The
Adria
English version
Arjona.
of
Okay.
it. Yeah, Adria Arjona. Mhm.
I've seen her in, other things. The most that I know her from is Morbius.
Ah,
So yeah, there is life after Morbius. This film is proof. But she plays Madison, our abused and beleaguered housewife. And as the movie goes on, and let me just say, from here on out, I think we got to talk spoilers. I think we got to get deep
absolutely.
into this movie, Jeff. And for those out there who are watching this and have not watched Hitman on Netflix, if you got it, it's in your queue. Um, Turn back now. If you have watched it, then stick around. But yeah, we're going to talk about some stuff that if you hear about it, you're gonna be like, oh, that's more than I wanted to know. But yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and put on the spoiler banner, a bit of a
Smart.
visual cue here. As the movie goes further and further along, we see that Gary is changing. You keep calling him Rod. It's Ron.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ron. Did I say Ron?
Yeah.
I meant Ron. Sorry.
Yes. I think Rod would have been better because that's more of the broad comedy kind of douche
Yes.
canoe kind
Yeah.
of guy. I'm Rod. Ugh.
That's funny. That's funny.
Yeah. But as the film goes along, he changes, but also we start seeing Madison a bit differently, because the abuse
Mhm,
angle, I think, is only played out once or only
mhm,
mentioned once, and then kind of it's just when we finally meet the husband, he's a jerk. There's an altercation outside a dance club where he and his buddy
mhm.
kind of confront
Right.
Ron and Madison, and Ron ends up pulling a gun, and it's one of the greatest. That gun just like comes out of nowhere, and it's like, where is this going?
Right.
Because just as a character, we know that Ron is the persona, but Gary is the person underneath, and Gary has never, hurt a fly as far as we can tell.
Mhm.
So how far can he push this act? And is he going to get his ass handed to him and be found out for the phony that he is in that moment? I think in a lesser movie, that's what would have happened, and it
Yep.
would have had all sorts of other kind of drama. But
Mhm.
uh, when it comes to Madison, she's doing things that are not in the character of the person who is just the abused, beleaguered,
Mhm.
desperate housewife who wants to be rid of this problem. We find out there's $1 million insurance policy. We find out that later she actually shoots and kills her husband, not in kind of a heated passion moment, but she finds him passed out in a car and just like shoots him dead in his
Mhm.
sleep. And then later, Jasper, a character we haven't talked about, but he is the guy that Gary replaced and became Ron for in the beginning of the movie because he
Right.
was the disgraced cop.
Right.
Jasper ends up playing a much bigger part in this movie than I ever thought. But at
Mhm.
the end, in the final kind of confrontation, it turns out Madison poisoned Jasper's beer. So she becomes a straight up femme fatale. I mean, there's one scene, maybe two, where she's wearing this bright red dress, and I'm thinking, oh, this is straight out of like Sin City, or she's the literally the femme fatale. And I'm watching this expecting for Gary slash Ron to understand what's happening,
Mhm.
to absorb what's happening, and to put a stop to it. But
Mhm.
at the end, I hate to bring this movie up in comparison, it becomes Basic Instinct, where they're kind of cuddling up in this happy ending, but the ice pick's right under the bed. I don't care
Yeah.
if they do have, I don't care if they do have kids, we flash forward and have this idyllic family life. It is one of the darkest endings I've ever seen. And I went from being in love with this movie to being like, I can't root for these characters anymore. Like
Yeah.
might need to watch it again to fully appreciate it, but I'm grudgingly saying this is a great movie.
Well, I hear you. I think that's the challenge of this, but there's little challenges all the way through it that I think build up to that in a way. I mean, that's one of the things that I thought was very clever about the script that Linklater and Powell wrote together is that they're showing us a lot of who she really is. And yet we want to believe because she's attractive and comely and she did this great sob story for him in the diner when they met and she was supposedly going to hire him that well, she was going to hire him, I guess. That she's a sympathetic person, and she is only up to a degree. And rather quickly, they start to portray her as not all that she appears to be. I mean, starting with the fact that it wasn't a coincidence that she chose that dance club. She chose that dance club because she knows that was where her husband was like to go, and chances are he would be there. And sure enough, he was. In most movies, that would be, oh, one of those terrible coincidences. Here we are. Who knew? And they do a little twist on that later when Jasper shows up when they're enjoying a sundae outside a kind of uh, ice cream stand or whatever you want to call it. But I love the way they tease that. And they also, right off the bat, Gary really enjoyed being Ron, and there was a little too much relish in him doing that even the first time. And then you saw him taking on these other personas that you said were sort of a montage. I love his little Patrick Bateman thing there too, but see, I think that's a little bit of a foreshadowing too. Like Patrick Bateman was actually an American Psycho, and it's not this just there because maybe Powell did a good Christian Bale imitation, or he's trying to be the slick guy with his hair back and the expensive suit, but again, maybe showing that Gary is actually a little bit more, dare I say, evil than maybe we at first thought we could ascribe to him. But I have to say that is one of the things that kept me going through this because I thought the way it's been sold with the posters and even the name of it, and you could almost see the trailer for this, couldn't you? You're like, he was a mild-mannered college professor, but then one day, that kind of stuff. And the premise is that, I mean, I'm sure most people approach this thinking, there's the elevator pitch. Might as well have had Sandra Bullock and Matthew McConaughey in it, but uh, or Ryan Reynolds back before he was Deadpool, swearing and cursing all the time, motherfucker. But they don't go there. In fact, they keep throwing in these little bits of this is darker, this is a little more adult, a little more maybe even sinister in a way, to the point where by the end And, you know, do you want me to, I mean, we've already talked some spoilers, but I mean, the thing where I know it lost you, I know, because I was sitting there with my mouth like, what? Are they really doing this? Is when he picks up that bag, that plastic bag, and he ties it around Jasper's face to make sure that he suffocates. And it's like, okay, I guess you really are soulmates or perfect for each other. But that was extraordinary. And the funny thing I thought about that too, and this is where Linklater and Powell in their script are very, very clever, is my favorite scene in the film. And this is one of those scenes where you applaud when people are smarter and better. And, you know, that's my big bitch about horror movies and all that, is I want smart characters. But when he is suddenly discovered that they think that she's the suspect in her husband's murder, and they want to send him in because he was with her, and he said, oh yeah, I went out, we just checked on her one time to see how she was, and we ran into each other, blah 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 blah. Well, no, we have to have you go in and set her up again and see what's going on and get her to confess and all this. And he goes, and I thought, shit, I mean, I'm just thinking there as a character, trying to empathize with the character, or even as a screen aficionado and critic, where is this going to go? And he goes in and is immediately holding up his cell phone with like, they're listening, you know, say this. And it's like, God, this guy's smart as a whip. I mean, he's really improvising very well. And it's funny too, because he pulls it off, and she goes along with it. And she's not like mad at him, or, you know, she doesn't fuck it up. No, she's playing right along. They're both two peas in a pod, pulling the con again on sort of the people who frankly are the good guys, and these people have now turned into really the bad guys.
And I think I like that scene, although I've seen that not specifically with the cell phone, but I've seen that kind of gimmick before where
Sure,
someone's
sure.
wearing a wire. Like usually it's like they snuck a piece of paper or something, like, you know, we're being watched, or this is
Right,
your
right.
or something like that. It's like a Sopranos kind of thing.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
that scene plays out very well, but it's that's not exactly where the movie lost me. It was, I think it was like right around this, because it's all towards the end of the movie. I pulled the brakes mentally during that outside college lecture that you mentioned, and I'll get
Mhm.
to why in a minute.
Sure.
But it just kind of bugged me that Gary slash Ron is such a smart, clever, think on his feet character, that it kind of bugged me that towards the end he didn't see. I kept waiting for him to raise an eyebrow at
Mhm.
her very obvious to me, watching from the outside, deceit. You know, I'm
Mhm.
like, really, he's not picking up any of these. He's not asking any
Mhm.
questions. Like, I don't even know, at no point does she show up with any kind of bruises or anything like that. So this
Mhm.
whole thing about being the abused, aggrieved housewife could have been a
Mhm.
setup from the very beginning. I don't know if it was, but I
She probably
wanted,
exaggerated.
right.
Although her husband is a, you know, fly off the handle asshat, but
He is, but I was wondering where the movie was going, because at one point, Ron gets an assignment to go meet someone who wants, you know, there's no time to prep, and I knew
Mhm.
exactly where it was going. There are, as clever as the screenplay is, there are moments where I'm like, yeah, I know, let's just get to it. That he's got to go meet this guy in a
Yep.
diner. There's
Yep.
no time to prep, and it turns out to be Madison's husband or
Yes.
ex-husband,
Yep.
and you get some revelations in there. And he says, you know, before you kill her, I want you to put the gun to her face and say, you know, this is from your loving husband. And, you know, it's because, you know, we've seen him be erratic and be overly passionate and emotional and kind of
Mhm.
an asshole. But I kept wondering, like, what's the other side of this story?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
what if we could peek into their kitchen and see, you know, their daily interactions? Who's the monster in this relationship? Is he reacting to what she's putting
Mhm.
down, or is he just like an emotional, you know, infant who just lashes out and abuses people? Because it really felt like when he gave that instruction that he was hurt. It
Yes.
wasn't like, I want you to tell her, you know, this is from your loving husband. He was almost like crying when he said that. Like, I don't know
Mhm.
what else to do. And it's, yeah, it's a very morally ambiguous movie. I think needs to be watched, studied, talked about multiple times. This isn't a one and done kind of movie, like a lot of Linklater is.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. In fact, I kept thinking the maybe more interesting end to that scene would have him with tears in his eyes tell her that I never stopped loving her. as opposed to like a vengeful thing. Like it was almost like OJ when he said like, well, I'd have to love her if I killed her, right? Because I just couldn't live without her. That kind of justification. But no matter, I mean, if that's where he was in his head, it's not quite the black and white villain that a lot of the rest of the film, or frankly Madison's story, would portray him as. I'm tending to think that if you watch this again and again, and I've only watched it the one time, you may start to see little clues that give us the feeling that maybe Madison is playing them all, or certainly exaggerating a little bit. Now, that's not to say that she wouldn't have gone to a hitman to get him to kill her husband if she could have, and she was spared there. And yet, I think her even wanting to do that points to the darkness of her soul that maybe isn't quite as forgivable as we maybe want to believe, or at least Gary and his guys did. The other thing too that I think is interesting about this movie are the little subtleties. Like I think, Linklater is always good with characters, and there's a lot, they come off pretty vividly here. Like I was actually really surprised that Jasper had a lot to do in this, and he figured much more than, oh, he's just the plot device who has to be a sleazebag so he gets suspended and can't do the undercover thing, and looks the part. And actually it's funny because he's almost looked exactly like the guy that he was trying to get in the first scene. They both have the overly done mustache and the sleazy hair and kind of the dirty blonde thing going. But one of the things that I find too about the acting in here, and this is a testament to Glen Powell, I think, everybody's saying it's a kind of a star-making role, and I think he'll get a lot more work after this, because I think he's been a little bit one note, or just sort of in simple roles that didn't require him to do much acting. But he does something very clever here, which I give Linklater and him maybe equal credit for. And that is when he's playing Ron, and when he's doing the other personas as well, even the first time, as good as he is, you can see him playing the role. And what I liked about that, it reminds me of Amy Adams in American Hustle, where she's doing the British accent. And it's not a great British accent, but it's what somebody who's an amateur would think is a very good British accent. And there's a little bit of that to Glen Powell's performance as Gary. Like he's sometimes a little bit forcing it, a little too much, and even kind of a squint, and kind of the Clint Eastwood kind of things. Like he's going through the Rolodex of like, should I do a little bit of Christian Bailey or Clint Eastwood, or maybe George C. Scott? Yeah, let's do a little George C. Scott. You owe me money, but he doesn't quite go that big, but still. And I think that's a clever choice, because he's not like Meryl Streep, who is, or Daniel Day-Lewis, like master thespian, living the role. You can see him playing the role a little bit. And I like that, just like with Amy Adams, where she's doing that sort of American version of an English accent that any British person would laugh out of the room.
For sure. I also like the detail of him getting so into his characters that he was making up like full wardrobe and even makeup and fake teeth, and learning how to do all this stuff. I mean, he's really committed to it, and without having some kind of I love that his ex-wife is in one scene.
Yep.
And it's very early on, and there's no scene later where she's like, what's happening to you?
What
It's
are
like,
you doing?
right.
Yeah,
like all my life,
shit.
no one ever looked at me, and I always wanted to be someone. This is my chance to be. No, all of that is in the
Or she comes
details
back
of,
like, if I knew you were going to be this guy, I would have stayed married to you. That kind of typical rom-com kind of crap.
It would have been interesting if there was one scene where she encounters Ron and or Gary with Madison, and just kind of picks up on that, kind of like that, woman's intuition of like, there's something's not right here. Like, I don't know if she's on the level.
Yeah. She
And it
might be
doesn't
a
even,
fat girl.
right. It doesn't even have to be something where she pulls him aside and says, you might want to watch out for the,
Right.
it could just be a look, like
Mhm.
Madison does something to betray this kind of like, oh, I'm just in love, and I'm, he's rescuing me, kind of a thing. I don't want to sit here and rewrite the screenplay, but it's just these things I'm thinking about, that, there are some points where personally the movie has some gaps, not a lot of them, but just a few.
They also, I think, if I can criticize the script for a second too, I think there's a couple scenes, in some respects, every scene, where we go back to Gary teaching, and they're underlining the theme a little highlightery for all of the people at home who probably are making sandwiches or playing with the dog while they're watching Netflix. But it's a little obvious, like, can people really change? Well, yes. And I think this movie is proving that. And a little that goes a long way. I mean, generally speaking, when they teach screenwriting classes or books and stuff like that, they'll say you have to kind of say what your theme is in the first 20 pages. It can be subtle, and it doesn't have to be, heavy-handed per se, but it has to be kind of there, which again, do you do that? Do you have to do that? Everything you watch practically does it. And they do that here a little bit but the interesting thing is they start to pay attention to him more as he's getting more and more like, confident about it. And maybe some of the Ron comes into play when he's teaching too. I think it is interesting too, the subtle changes. Like, I love the first scene, and this is one of those great little touches where in order to be convincing as the hitman, he has to do a subtle but important wardrobe change. And that is get out of those god awful jean shorts, which I don't know any man who's under 11 would be caught dead in jean shorts unless he has no clue. And maybe that's Gary in a way. They make his hair a little bit ugly too. Like, I think he'd probably have a little more sense that deep down Gary is a pretty good looking, Glen Powell's a pretty good looking guy. But it is funny how one or two of those things in his class are underlined a little too broadly, where I think the jean shorts is just a marvelous touch, and he's changing jeans with, the guy who truly is kind of a nerd, one of the techie guys in the van doing surveillance, and yet he's got the better jeans because they're not going to buy Ron as a hitman if he walks in with, those god awful,
the jorts. Yeah.
Shorts. I love it.
Now
it's funny.
I agree with you to an extent on the whole classroom thing, because it's a trope in any movie about like high school. They're going to have an English class or a drama class or something where they're talking about the theme that all the teenagers are going through outside that class. But I appreciate that, again, because it's Linklater, it's not, here's Romeo and Juliet. No, it's about like spelling out what it means, the triumvirate of the superego, the id, and the ego, and how they relate to each other, and how we're all kind of walking around trying to master aspects of each. That's really interesting. I think that's something that you can learn from while you're watching this otherwise kind of a weird rom-com crime plot movie.
Let me ask you this too, Ian, because one of the things that struck me, and I grant you and I have a different kind of lens when you're looking at something that you potentially are going to review, or, even it's hey, here's a new movie that you might want to think about as a critic. But while I delighted in what the movie was not, I kept thinking about so often what this kind of movie is. And even the good ones tend to be sort of a certain stripe. And in my review, I mentioned that the sort of where the person becomes more like their alter ego, or this weird blurring of lines, and it gets them into big trouble. And it's usually kind of fall down revelatory, oh my God, stuff, whether it's Tootsie, Mrs. Doubtfire, Victor, Victoria, they all kind of have that. And it's done very well. I mean, Tootsie, when he has to go live and, Edward Kimberly, I'm Edward Kimberly. And they keep saying, I'm Edward Kimberly, because, they know they're going to get laughs. So you got to hear the line. But those kind of things are such tropes in these things. And I thought, okay, we're going to hit a couple of these, because the posters of a romantic comedy, typical kind of poster, and some of the way even the elevator pitch is such a rom-com kind of shtick, but they don't. And I'm impressed that they don't. They come close to it a little bit, maybe with the idea when Jasper is kind of saying, aha, I caught you, and he's there, but it never turns into kind of something where everybody discovers it and he's loses all of his friends and that kind of stuff. They veer clearly into the much more darker stuff, but it's almost like they took the Larry David, Jerry Seinfeld idea of Seinfeld, no hugging, no learning. But they also avoid the treacle here too, which is funny because they replaced that with a very, very bitter broth, I dare say. I mean, that ending is like, wow, I couldn't believe it went there. It's like, that's where they're going with this. Yep, that's where they're going with this. He's committing murder too. Following up on her. I mean, they're partners in crime, I guess.
Couple of things. One, I'm gonna forget these because I'm tired. That scene. First of all, talking about playing it, one way versus the more expected conventional way.
Mhm.
When Jasper runs into um, Ron and Madison at that ice cream stand, and
Mhm.
Ron sees Jasper, like they're sitting at a picnic table.
Right.
It's nighttime, and Ron sees Jasper like at the order window, and he's like, "Oh shit, is he gonna see me? Maybe if I." You almost get, because of the camera angles. We're hoping, as well as Ron is hoping, or Gary,
That they
that
don't. Yeah.
he doesn't see him. He's just
Yeah.
gonna kind of go there. Jasper does see him. He comes over, and we're not sure exactly how much time has elapsed since the last time we saw Jasper, and the last
Right.
time that sting with Madison initially, because
Mhm.
Jasper was on the line listening to that whole
Right.
thing.
Right.
I don't think he knew what she looked like necessarily,
Right. Right.
but we're not sure if he genuinely doesn't know what's going on in that scene, or if he
Mhm.
does know and he's playing it really coy just to kind of
Mhm.
hold it over
Yeah.
Ron's
See what
head.
he can do with it.
Right. I could screw you right now, but I'm not going to. I'm gonna bank this for later.
Mhm.
I'm still not quite sure. I think that he honestly, because the way that the actor played it, I want to give him a shout out, because I think I've seen him before, but I couldn't remember where from. Was it
Austin
Austin or
Emilio.
Emilio?
Yeah, he's very good in
Very good
this.
in this, and he's good also because, I mean, he's gives a great performance, but he's in the service of a wonderful screenplay. Because when we
Mhm.
first see him, he's the disgraced cop, and you're like, oh
Right.
well, he's he's disposed of now. Like, he's on suspension for 2 months,
Mhm.
but possibly what's going to happen is there'll be a piece of dialogue later. Oh, like, he's never coming back. He does come back, and then
Mhm.
you're like, oh well, okay, he's coming back. He's in the movie for a little bit, but then he's going to go away, or he's going to quit,
Mhm.
or something like
Right.
that. But no, he keeps showing up, and
Mhm.
his role becomes bigger and bigger, and
Yes.
it's this shadow that no one can see looming over them until the very
That's
end,
right.
when he's
That's
sitting
exactly
in
right.
Madison's apartment. Oh, it's so good. But I do want to say that scene with the bag, you mentioned, when Madison has poisoned Jasper's beer. Jasper, I just love the details in this, the performance, the direction. I imagine it goes down to the screenplay, but instead of Jasper just keeling over because he's been poisoned, or having some big, like, foaming at the mouth and like
Right.
screaming and
Right.
"You betrayed me," he starts having, it looks like a very subtle heart attack, where he's like
Mhm.
kind of slowing down, and then he's kind of stammering, and then grabbing for
Mhm.
something, and then like he falls, but he's sort of crawling, and then he slumps over. It just felt so real to me when Ron goes and gets the bag and puts it over his head, and then they're kind of committing to this murder. There is a shot where you can see Ron in the back, or Jasper in the background, and you can see the puff of the bag.
Mhm.
I thought that they were doing a double cross on Madison, that when Ron had put the bag over him, maybe there was, like, he didn't tie it as tightly, or he
Mhm.
left like a pocket in the back where she wouldn't be
Right.
able to see. And it was going to be, because the setup is exactly like the other setups that he'd been doing all
Mhm.
throughout the movie, where he's
Yes.
getting the person to open up, and that doesn't quite happen. And that record scratch was when I was like, oh shit, they're
Mhm.
they're in this together for real. Where is this
See,
going?
that's what I have to say when I said that I think this is one of the better films this year. Now, that's also judging it on the curve, because it's not been a great year for films so far, at least maybe not as much at this point in several years earlier. But at almost every point where I thought, okay, the film could go this way, it goes this way. And I have to say, I'm surprised at that. For example, when you said the bag thing, I thought that too. I thought, oh, see, this is going to be the moral ending where, Jasper redeems himself, even though he's a disgraced cop, and Gary returns to kind of his virtues by catching her. And, oh, sorry, but there you go. It's like Catwoman being carted off by the police, and Batman is left with his bat boner. Oh, Robin, you don't understand. Holy coitus interruptus, Batman. I didn't think you knew that. You've been reading Annie Harriet's manuals again. But anyway, you didn't think I
Wow.
was going to do 3 minutes on that, did you? Can you edit that out? You may want to. It's a family show. Sorry, people, but go ahead.
Family
Look,
show. No.
not this film. Uh, but uh, but there's so many of those points where I kept watching it, and to your point, as you said, like, I'm starting to love this film more and more. I kept thinking, okay, now this is when they're going to do that. Nope, they didn't do that. This is when they're going to do that. And to that point, when you said about they take time to show him having this heart attack, this physical act. In 99 out of 100 movies, even of decent, probably thrillers that we like and maybe would laud otherwise, they would have the guy go and right over. This takes its time. This takes the time. Oh, they're in the bath together. Ooh, a little bit of skin, a little bit of sexual play. And then they have a real conversation. We see them talking on the dates. It's not like, oh, we get the best 45 seconds of it and then we're moving on. Or there's no goofy montage where they're like, bringing in the nominated best song over the 3 or 4 dates of them, sharing everything from bowling to petting kittens. Even, sort of when he catches the criminal the first time, he waits to watch him get caught and sort of, take a little victory lap in front of him, which is like, that is not good if he comes back. But see, that guy doesn't really come back in a bad way. He comes back in other ways. But that's what I loved about this movie, is at every point where, again, 99 out of 100 of these kind of films would go in this one direction that maybe is done well, but it's a very sort of predictable direction. This film doesn't, including right up until that end where it's like, oh my God, Gary is not going to be redeemed. And it's like, how many times have you seen that in a movie? That is as rare. I mean, even Walter White killed all the bad guys at the end of Breaking Bad. Michael Corleone killed all the bad guys at the end of The Godfather too, but for his own selfish means. And here, and then he wins. It reminded me a little bit of just as a quick aside, that this is one of those films when people say, what's your favorite movie of a certain director who's made 30, 40 years worth of films? And they'll ask me, like, what's your favorite Woody Allen movie? And I always say Crimes and Misdemeanors, because at the end, when they happen to meet at this wedding by chance, Woody Allen sits down and he's like, well, I kind of lost everything. And what's his one crime if he did anything? It was really the misdemeanor of showing the Alan Alda character, his romantic rival, to be a shit. Just to cut together an asshole cut, like, look at him being just the worst boss and smug everything. That's not criminal. But Martin Landau, who has his mistress killed, and he wins. He not only wins, gets away with it, but he's happy as a clam. He's so smiling and happy. And even do you remember the poster? He's kind of smiling with his eyes closed, almost like, this is bliss. While Woody Allen is sitting next to him on the poster going like, fuck me, I guess I screwed up, and this one is that. It's like, not only does he get away with it, he wins spectacular. They've got the big home with her $1 million insurance. They've got the 2 kids. They seem to be happy. And hot damn, it's like, there you go, America. You think the good guys win? Not in this decade.
And that's the kind of the heartbreaking thing, because we see Gary make a choice at some point, almost off screen. It's not like an Anakin Skywalker moment where he bows down before the Emperor. He's just made that choice.
Yep.
And the body language, I think, is very key, because towards the beginning, I wasn't quite sure what I made of Glen Powell's choice as Gary, the school teacher, because he did that thing. I don't want to stand up and do it, but it's like you kind of arch your back and you got your hands kind of behind you on your hips. Yep. It's very George McFly, what Crispin Glover did in Back to the Future. I'm like, okay, that's the telltale kind of Saved by the Bell nerd body language. But by the end, when he's giving that open air campus lecture, it's almost Ron giving that lecture. It's Gary's face and voice, but it's Ron's body language and confidence. And the scene ends with, it's the sitcom thing of like, to the female students, one of them nudges the other, says, oh my God, when did the teacher become so hot? I'm like, yeah, but I mean, I can understand.
Right. But you raised an interesting point too, and you said it with the red dress and some of the other things. Oh, that's the other thing too, is you keep expecting the wife to come back. She doesn't. You don't expect Jasper to come back, and he does, and he figures more and more prominently. I mean, those are wonderful surprises. But in regards to Madison as well, as attractive as she is, and she's ridiculously attractive, and she's got a little bit of the I know it sounds like a cliche, but you said femme fatale, and maybe a touch of that Latino Spitfire, if you will, in the sense of that, she knows how to wear the red lipstick and the dark hair, and it's all working for good. But I found her persona to be much more interesting in this. She talks a lot. She has conversations. She has opinions. And then things like when she finds out that Gary is Ron, and that she doesn't overreact like, Jessica Lange, who slaps him and doesn't see him for 3 months, and until Charles Durning returns the ring. Uh, uh, but that I thought was interesting too, because you can tell that, yes, she's of course beautiful and comely and all that kind of good stuff, but Gary first falls for her sympathetic story, which could be a ruse, and he continues to fall for her persona, and she kind of herself, like the screenplay, defies expectations. She doesn't quite act the way you think, and even when she confesses that she did murder him, it's not like seething with resentment for him figuring it out, the way they would in an Agatha Christie movie, like, oh, Hercule Poirot, you think you know so much, but you don't, but I do, the little gray cells. She was like, yeah, I did. I killed him. No, he was just sleeping. And it's just like, wow, she's kind of matter of fact. She's kind of calm. She doesn't get overwhelmed about anything, including when she finds out that he's kind of been lying to her. And I think that keeps drawing him more towards her, because she herself is not the cliche that he maybe thought she was going to be, as a femme fatale, a potential killer, an actual killer, an unforgiving person for being lied to, when she's lying herself. And it's like, oh, you've been lying too? Well, there you go. I guess we're even. Want to go have sex? I mean, it was almost like there was just this is what happens when two people meet in the mind as well as the heart and soul.
And I almost, as much as it would have been as on the nose as some of those like college lectures that we're talking about, I almost wish there was that little button on it, because again, it's so jarring to see them flash forward and like, oh, they've got kids and they're living what's supposed to be an idyllic life, but I almost believe it's like detente, like mutually assured destruction. Like they're both in this now, but can they even trust each other? Because he's now helped her murder someone, and he knows that she has murdered her ex-husband in cold blood. So if anything goes wrong, I don't know if counseling's gonna fix it.
Yeah, this could be the new another sort of before trilogy. The interesting thing about it, another thing I was reminded at the very end, and that is, there's two things I was reminded. One is, of course, the line "ignorance is bliss," which you always hear, and I think to some degree they have to make a bargain that they know, but they're not going to really let it cloud their judgment. I mean, you wonder if it's the thing they save for the end of the bad argument, like, you never take out the trash. Well, you always wear, cream on your face. It's not very romantic at night. Yeah, well, you killed you killed your husband. Yeah, well, you killed your associate, oh, fuck you. That's the end of the argument. But it reminded me a little bit of the end of, I don't know if you're a Star Trek, the original series fan, but the second pilot, which was the menagerie, where they take Christopher Pike back to the planet because now he's in this terrible mold of sort of a wheelchair, and he can't do anything.
Like a proto Dalek, yeah.
And he goes back and has his body, and there's that great scene where Kirk is left in the room, and he sees the head of the aliens on the screen, and he goes, Captain Pike has his version of reality. May yours be just as satisfying, or whatever I'm paraphrasing here. But it's like, yeah, they've sort of made this choice, and their choice is an illusion. Maybe deep down they know what they are and what they've become, but it's an interesting choice when you say, I'm going to live the lie, I'm going to live with this sin, I'm going to move on because maybe the world was better without her husband and Jasper, in their minds, and maybe that's how they justify it. But it's a big leap for most people, and that's why I think this ending has that impact. Even if it kept you from loving it, it's like, wow, they really went there. They set that up and they went there. It shook me up a little bit. I mean, I was, like I said, as a critic who's seen everything, we have to look at everything and catch everything and see twists and plots coming a mile away. This one surprised me.
It did, and it's, again, I have to watch this again or think about it some more to figure out how it left, like, it's almost like this emotional vacuum, because I don't quite know how to respond. I admire, I think, something that Linklater did brilliantly, whether intentionally or unintentionally, because like we've been talking about, like down to the poster, it looks like every other, direct to Netflix, bad rom-com with a, kind of a plot twist to it, right? But at the end, we get that kind of sappy, rom-com ending where, flash forward a few years, they got the 2.5 kids in the house and they're smiling and volunteering for each other and everything's great, but there's no indication of what they had done to get there. And I think in other movies, there's like a twinge of darkness, but this is like, you're supposed to leave, the message is leave the theater on a happy high note, but don't think about don't think about it too much, or don't think about it at all. It's kind of like a
Well, that
spousal
would,
abuse movie that ends with sunshine and rainbows or something.
but see, they're Christopher Pike and you're Captain Kirk. That's why you had the conflict about it. Because I think for some people they go like, oh, look at that, they got away with it. Oh, they seem happy and they got the kids and they seem okay. Where you and me were like, holy crap, that's wow.
Yeah, and I think it's a daring choice. I mean, I know it was in theaters, but I don't remember seeing any kind of promotion
I don't
for it.
either. Very little, if any at all.
But it's weird because I don't know how this would do as like a mainstream push kind of movie, because it's called Hitman. It's got that poster, and it's the idea of, oh, it's a guy who's pretending to be a hitman. So you kind of expect, oh, he's going to end up like accidentally killing people, or in these situations that other people are dropping like flies around him. No, there's actually 2 deaths in this movie, one of which happens off screen.
Right.
That's not to say it's not thrilling. It's just, this is not like a mainstream picture, but it is the kind of movie that I'm watching it wishing that this was the baseline for mainstream cinema. Smart, fascinating stuff that really challenges the audience, instead of like, oh, I'm gonna go watch The Fall Guy.
Ian, it's funny. I was thinking over the weekend as I was wanting to gather some thoughts to prepare for your show. You're exactly right. In fact, I'm glad you brought it up, because it occurred to me, and I wasn't necessarily going to, but this is the kind of film that I wish Hollywood make more of, these like 3 or 4 of these a year, and they just don't anymore. And there's what they are is these kind of subtle and sort of not too attention-y, noisy, smart films, that you keep waiting for them to stumble, to go too big, to go too broad, to go too stupid. Oh, we've got to have that big chase scene at the end. Oh, we've got to have this. No. They don't do that here, and it's much more subtle. And it reminds me of some of my favorite movies. And I'm not saying this is a favorite movie of all time, but a lot of my favorite movies have endings that, like, that is subtle yet exactly right. We talked about this a number of times, but I love the ending of The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, where it's not a big shootout. It's not a big thing where, Walter Matthau turns out to be pretty good with a weapon and stuff. No, he's going door to door, just slumming about, just trying to figure out who it is. And then Gesundheit. Like, I think I got you. Or I don't know if you've seen The Ghostwriter. That's another of my favorite movies of the last 20 years, with Ewan McGregor as the ghostwriter.
Woody Allen, right?
No. This is it's actually Roman Polanski. It's Pierce Brosnan as the Tony Blair-esque prime minister who's kind of resigned in scandal, and now he's writing his memoirs. But it ends with this incredibly smart, perfect ending, because the writer, who's a ghostwriter and doesn't get really the credit he wants as an artist, feels the need to let the bad guys know that he got him. And what does it get him? Not much. In fact, you'll have to see it. I'm not going to say anything more. But I love those kind of movies. And this one just sort of, you're right. For some people, they'll maybe look and they go like, oh, wow, look, they have a perfect life and they have a nice house and they're doing volunteer work. And I guess they were right for each other. Now they're living a good life. It's like, guys, they both killed somebody, and the elephant is in the room, whether they're going to admit it or not, and we're cheering for this. It's a very subtle ending, but I think a stinging one, just like those 2 that I mentioned, where it still has this impact that you don't need the gunfight, you don't need the chasing, you just have, wow, they made that choice. That's the ending. Wow.
Yeah, there's 2 things I want to kind of end on, speaking of endings, but one, we talked about the disguises, and you brought up in your review and also here tonight, the Patrick Bateman kind of American Psycho persona. It's not just that he looked so much like he was, like the understudy for Christian Bale in that movie, but I was watching it thinking, if they were to remake Americans, like I love American Psycho, the novel and the book,
very underrated film.
Right, and I don't like the idea of remakes on principle, but if they were going to remake it, I could totally see Glen Powell in this kind of role, dialing it back a little bit because it's a little bit too much in the, I think
Yeah.
possibly the teeth and the costuming, but to the persona, I was like, wow, that's a
Yep.
Patrick Bateman-esque character. The other
Yep.
one was there was I can't remember which one it was, but he was playing someone who reminded me of Tilda Swinton in Snowpiercer.
Yes.
He even had like the kind of British accent and the kind of the weird
Yes.
haircut and
Yes.
like yeah, like I don't know how many of these characters he played were homages to other like kind of cinematic figures, but it's kind of a fun game to play. Um,
Or like a teacher who maybe would conjure up these film archetypes to sort of draw from and think he was creating a real strong persona, even though he's kind of just doing a parody of them, which is again like that bad British accent that Amy Adams did and thinking it was a good accent, her character thinking it was a good accent.
oh my God, I just thought of like if he was like the philosophy teacher, but then he also doubled as like the film studies teacher.
There you go. It's like this. What's the lesson here? Teachers don't make any money.
There you go.
They're always moonlighting, taking other jobs. It's a sad story.
All right. Here's what I want to end on. I'm
right.
saving the worst for last because we're going to file this under the category of no, Ian, it's really just you. The record scratch moment for me came very late in the picture, and it is that outdoor college lecture. Because we pick up on, and again, I watched the movie once. Maybe there's more of a through line thematically and story wise with these college lectures, but this last one seemed to come kind of out of left field, in that they are talking about, is it justified to execute someone or exile them for a horrific crime or a specific danger? And they end up talking about the leader of a tribe. They're not just talking about, a random person, because I think if they've been talking about just a person who committed a crime or suspected of something, that would fit more in with the story. But I just could not help thinking, because this is a Netflix movie, because of, I'll use that phrase, liberal Hollywood. I was watching this thinking, this feels to me like a dig at Donald Trump. Now, I know we don't agree necessarily politically on everything, but I just want to read the transcript of this and let the audience make up their mind and see if you caught this, Jeff, or if it really is just me.
I did think that myself.
Okay, so I'm not crazy.
No.
I might be crazy, but okay.
There's a couple moments like that where I think the symbolism might choke a horse. How about the fact that they're out in the open? Like, see, it's now out in the open. He's being Ron out in the open in front of everybody, and his class has moved out of this stuffy, nerdy, study hall into the world where he can now be free and easy and himself. And now he's a sexual magnet to the female students. And there's a little talk about what do we do with a bad leader? Yeah, as soon as you go there, I think you a lot of people probably saw that too. But go ahead, read the transcript.
Well,
probably worse than the transcript, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's so on the nose that it's one of those things where I was like, hold on a second. Am I imagining things because it's an election year and all this other stuff and the
does it
media
need
attention
it?
is around this man? But what's going on here? And I would play the clip, but I don't want to get struck by Netflix. So the setting is they're at an outdoor lecture, and this is Gary talking to his students. So what are you going to do about your problem? This existential threat in the form of our unhinged leader who's invading other tribes. He's killing, he's raping, he's pillaging. Seems like he's going to get you all killed. What are your options? Student A says, we're kind of mixed. Some of us think we should exile him. Student B says, we don't have the means to exile him. What are we going to do? Put him on a boat? C, student C says, the majority of us want to eliminate him. Whatever we have to do for our own survival. Gary says, so how do we solve this problem? Student B says, execution. Gary says, that's ruthless, but historically, potentially the right choice. Now, there's been a lot of scholarship on this subject, this very subject recently, and the new thinking is that these kind of targeted killings actually play a larger part in our social evolution than previously thought. This impulse to weed out these kind of destabilizing forces is likely a dark thread in our historical DNA. These killings were thought to serve a twofold purpose: They not only protected social coherence and norms, but also eliminated a kind of abusive and uncooperative person from the gene pool. And I was like, fuck you, Richard Linklater and Glen Powell. But then, of course, the movie resumes course after taking a moment for this very bizarre PSA, and I got on with my life.
To your very point, some of the language there, you can't say existential threat in 2024 without talking about the constant use of that term in the news media and everything else. You can't say, some of the other descriptions that clearly could be referring to them. Of course, maybe on the other side, they think that's Biden being crazy and just as fascist or dictatorial. Who knows? I do agree, though. I think when I saw it, I immediately thought it's there for a little subtle, if not so subtle, jab at somebody that they clearly don't like in probably it's Trump. But I also thought the story was wrong, because I think what he should have been talking about there is it immoral if you don't think it is? And that's, sort of the essence of, I think, sort of us, whether it's the golden rule or the idea that there are laws that we all must subscribe to, and it's not up to one person to make a choice, which you could also say is maybe nodding to 2024 a little bit. But I think that would have been better, because he should have been asking a question about himself. At that point, he should have been asking them for guidance on who he is. And then ultimately his decision is to sort of say, to hell with the laws of man. I'm taking the law into my own hands and living with that. And thank you very much. I'm going to be okay, which I think would have been a scarier implication about a person who can change and never looks back or thinks twice about it. Yeah, it was a little heavy handed. I don't know why they, to your point, to sort of make that statement, we're going to go out there and make this a political film in the last 10 minutes, when it really distracts from the fact that that's the setup and maybe the final foreshadowing of why Gary becomes who he does, and sort of literally turns into Ron.
Yeah.
It's like Norman Bates at the end, Norman is no longer himself. He's his mother, now he's completely Ron.
Well, Ron, for the most part, until the last 15 minutes of this movie, is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But no, I'm glad that it's not just me. I haven't heard much, anyone else really talking about it. And that's why I was kind of like, I don't know if I'm reading too much into this. I'm willing to concede that maybe I am. Maybe Richard Linklater and Glen Powell are like, wait, who's Donald Trump? But but no, I'm glad that you recommended this movie to me. I'm glad we got to talk about it, because for as much as we've kind of dissected it and maybe given folks the impression that like it's kind of uneven, or we don't, we're not crazy about it, I think we are in many ways crazy about it and wish there were more films like this. And, I can't wait to see what Richard Linklater does next. He's one of those directors that constantly surprises us. I have not seen all of his filmography, but when I see movies like this, I'm like, oh, I got to go back and catch up with everything. But on the other hand, it's nice to have some things kind of in the back pocket to discover later. I've heard people refer to this or compare this movie to another movie he did called Bernie with Jack Black.
Oh, Bernie's a great movie.
Ago.
Shirley MacLaine. Yep. Matthew McConaughey. It's very well done.
Okay, I'll have to check that out. Especially as again, I've heard as sort of a spiritual kind of companion piece to this film. So, yeah.
He's a kind of filmmaker that there aren't too many like him left anymore. There used to be those guys who could do really strong character comedies, dramas, dabble in some experimentation stuff, but really just vivid characters being brought. Michael Ritchie was another guy who did that a lot in the 70s. He did The Candidate and The Bad News Bears. And, even Alan J. Pakula, though he, went a little bit more towards the thriller route, but they were always character-driven thrillers, whether it was Clute or All the President's Men. You're on the edge of your seat in both of those, but almost no violence or any violence. But good characters and good stories.
Well, it gets back to what we were talking about, in The Fall Guy, and I'd argue a lot of movies that have come out this season. This movie, it's refreshing because it feels like it's written by and for and about adults.
Yes.
And not just adults, but like really smart people, or people who are smart but are kind of lost and trying to find themselves and doing it this way, rather than, whatever Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt were doing. They're playing people who are in their late 30s, early 40s, who feel like they're trying to be, Gen Zers or something. I don't
Yes.
get it.
Yeah,
Ugh.
adults have conversations, and despite the fact that you have two attractive leads here, most of their relationship is conversation, and I like that. It's not like, oh, they have great sex, like in Body Heat, it was just sex, and William Hurt says, "I'm going to continue to go visit her because the sex is great," but they never had any intellectual conversations. These people are a meeting of the minds, maybe twisted and dark, but still, it's mostly them talking and sort of connecting that way, and bravo to both of them in the screenwriting and Linklater in his direction to give it that time for that to play out strongly.
And I know I said I was going to end this, but you just reminded me of something. This movie was written by two guys, and
Mhm.
yet I think they wrote one of the strongest, most interesting
Yes,
female protagonists slash possibly antagonists that we've
yes,
seen in forever.
I
You know,
agree entirely.
Madison is it's in the subtext that she might be a kind of a villain, but regardless, she's vulnerable without being, the damsel in distress.
Yep.
She feels like a well-rounded person who has lived a
Mhm.
life. And, Glenn Powell, for as much as he looks like a himbo, he's a smart guy. They don't have to put each other down to build, each other up in some like weird give and take, like we see a lot of like relationship comedies and dramas lately. These are just two people who meet, connect, fall in lust, then love, then whatever is going on at the end
Yeah,
there.
right.
And it's a real joy to see. And damn it, Jeff, I'm going to put everything aside and just say I fucking love this movie. This is one of the best of the year.
I'm so glad, and I'm glad my recommendation didn't make you go, Jeff. Jeff, I can't have you on my show anymore because you keep recommending these terrible films. No, I'm glad you felt that way because I really liked it too. It's one of my favorite films this year, and I think it's like I said, I think it's a real sleeper. I think it's going to be word of mouth building because I've talked to a number of people who said, "Oh my God, I saw it! I can't believe how good it was. I wasn't even look at that." And you should look beyond those posters. That's the next thing for Netflix. They got to get out of these terrible posters.
Well, yeah, that's a whole other conversation, along with the
Indeed.
idea of things like just ending up on streaming. I think i- it's got the top 10, or because it's Netflix, it's this movie that we made happens to be in the top 10 most watched things, whether or not
Yes.
that's believable. But you almost have to have that called out because there's a billion things on Netflix to
Right.
watch.
Right.
How many of them are actually special or worth investing your time in? I think this is definitely one of them. So, Jeff York of the Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists, I didn't give you a shout out because I started rambling right
That's
off
right.
the
That's right.
bat.
I love it. It was good. Way
But
to
links
go.
to both things are down below, including your review and your awesome Glenn Powell dual caricature.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for recommending this and for hanging out and talking about Hitman, which is now on Netflix and possibly still in theaters. If it's in theaters, I recommend going to see it this weekend. Give it, not that Netflix needs anybody's money, but I think just the idea of going to see something like this in a theater, because even though it's kind of an intimate character piece, it still has these larger than life themes and characters that I think
Right.
deserve to be appreciated.
Absolutely. See it with someone you love.
Uh,
Or it might be an interesting date movie. Imagine the conversation after.
Oh my God. I would love to see some hidden cameras of like, the diner like across the street from the Cineplex where they're showing this movie and they catch like couples going to talk about this movie at, that's a Rorschach test for your
Isn't
future
it?
partner.
That's right. Right there. It's like, okay, she liked it a little too much, a little and for all the wrong reasons.
Oh, all right. Well, we're gonna leave it there. Jeff, thanks so much. And for everyone out there, be sure and catch up with Jeff's stuff. Links down below. If you like this show, like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you very much and take care.